today, the First Lady, and she's expressed a desire to sing our song. So, here's how we do it. I hope Gary hasn't forgotten the tune. I hope you haven't forgotten the words. I hope I haven't forgotten the words. And I hope you haven't forgotten the words. One, two, three. Take me out to the ball. Me out to the moon. Buy me some.
On the last day of 2018, which is the 31st of December, the Monday Morning Quarterback from WBRN Radio and on the Boston Red Network. And as we normally do, we remember our former broadcast partner, Jerry Pippin, who passed away in 2015. January will mark, near the end of January, will mark 11 years that we've been at this. Over 2 million people have come to visit us. We're appreciative of all the people from the EU, the Russian Federation, the Ukraine, China, various African countries along the way there, and across the continental U.S., particularly people in New England, in California, and the other parts of our heartland. And for the various publications that we use here, the Washington Post, the LA Times, the Public News Service, Dan Rather's News and Guts, and many, many more, including the San Diego Union Tribune there, and the Face the Nation. We usually use them. We're using them today. They're final, that they have some presidential historians there. We have a little edited version of that. We have also some of Michael Moore and John Tester, the senator re-elected from the so-so red state of Montana. That's not that red nor that reliable. We are still in the government shutdown, which many have called the DJ Trump shutdown. And the government will reconvene the new House on Wednesday. They will start that out and that journey. And the Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, has said they will move as quickly as they can to pass a bill to reopen the government. So it'd be interesting. A fellow asked me tonight, when did I think the government would reopen? Well, very difficult to say, because we're dealing with a very unpredictable administration under DJ Trump. We'll go in a second here to the Los Angeles Times. The Chief of Staff now, General Kelly, who is leaving as quickly as he can get out the door, talks about that so-called mythical wall that DJ Trump's talked about on the campaign trail. The whole idea of a physical wall itself in 2018, be 2019, is hilarious, preposterous, etc. And that was to get over to his supporters, that they could physically keep people out of the country. Well, yes, you can do that. The whole idea is to clean up and modernize the immigration laws. If they were really serious about this, the Congress and the President, they would mandate nationally e-verifier, which is fairly accurate. It's not 100% accurate, but it's one of the stepping stones to immigration, and also bring the immigration laws into more uniformity. The H-1 visas, they need to work on that and limit those. That is a sore point. And various other specialty programs that they have that are not tuned So thus a new bill. Incidentally, in Texas, a federal judge there that ruled that the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, was unconstitutional, has stayed his order until they can appeal it, and usually about 90 days to perfect that appeal, depending obviously there, but they'll serve a notice of appeal. It used to be on the rule is normally about 10 days, depending obviously there. They've already served public notice at the appeal. I'm not sure. I'd have to look at it to see have they actually filed an appeal, but if he has stayed his order, they will file an appeal, and then of course that case will go on to the circ, from the district to the circ, and possibly on to the Supreme Court. The new Congress, no doubt, will work on the Affordable Care Act. They will do that. They are also working on the Voting Rights Act to modify it. So there'll be a lot of things they'll be doing. And we've talked about this before. The priorities for this quote-unquote new Democratic Congress is to basically pass legislation. They have decided that. Investigative work, and Congress does have what they call oversight. It's been around for a very long time. But for this particular Congress, in this particular year, due to the amount of polarization, it would be prudent for the Democrats, the progressives, the so-called liberals, and whatever else they got there, to work on specific legislation that needs to be done and get their part of it done, send it on to the Senate, and see what old man McConnell does or does not do, and that will become the proverbial football for 220. And when you speak of the 220 election, that'll be the next national election, you're actually talking about announcements will be made, some right after the holidays here, and other announcements will be made in the spring and perhaps later the summer. Campaigns are run much differently now, even in the U.S., that in 2019, where we're going to in a few days here, you'll start to see these announcements come out. The fundraising, $1 billion for a campaign, we're talking about a hell of a lot of money. Even people that don't get any delegates in the delegation process, like Baby Bush, Jeb Baby Bush, spending tens of millions of dollars and literally never got a delegate. So you're going to see some of that out here. The Democratic field is crowded. And in modern politics, to crowd the field is somewhat childish, because many of these candidates are never going to get nominated for anything. They're trying to get their national profile out. But what a candidate must think of is the people that he represents. In other words, the cause, the community. We'll use the word community. We've been talking about community here, and this is Kwanzaa, incidentally. The last day of Kwanzaa, before I forget it here, is today, actually. Let's see, this is Monday. Let me get this straight here. On the 30th, it was Nina. That is purpose. That was the 30th. And today we have Kulumba, creativity. So this is it. And actually, we do have one more day. The last day is Imani, which is faith. And incidentally, a programming note here. We will have our New Year's Day New Year's Eve program, and that will be later tonight. We'll get that one out here. That will take care of New Year's Eve and January the 1st, all rolled into one neat little package, and that we look forward to doing. And speaking back in community, yes, there are many communities out here. We hope also to get an open source program in sometime today or tomorrow. Too much libation on the first, but anyway, we'll get it in. I guess it will be now the first day of 2019, talking about open source Libre software and hardware, and Ubuntu. Ubuntu, of course, being the open source community, Nelson Mandela. We always use him to introduce that particular situation. So what we're trying to do here is get communities together. Dan Rabbit talked about community. Professor Reich out at Berkeley talks about community. So we're hearing people, even Thor talks about a community also. So many people are talking about communities. And Dr. Maulana Karinga and his celebration of Kwanzaa is very, very important. Kwanzaa, is one of the very important things. Incidentally, we'll go over this theme again, is re-imaging and rethinking the world. A Kwanzaa commitment to the inclusive good. If you recall, the Google people, their motto is do no evil. Well, good. We can play upon what is good, what is not. We can kind of redefine the terms there in terms of what is positive, what is negative. We look at dialectically. So thus, what we're saying here is Kwanzaa is a commitment to the positive and the inclusive positive there for all of our communities, whether they be local communities, they are international communities, period. At the very heart and center of the celebration of Kwanzaa is the ethical imperative and social obligation of the cooperative, creative, and sharing of an inclusive good. That's from Dr. Maulana Karinga in his annual Founders Message. This principle and related practices are rooted in the ancient origins in the African harvest and the communitarian worldview and a way of life that is under is underguarded and informative. The founder said the ancient root of Kwanzaa is in the shared African harvest and celebration. Let me get this light a little different here. Of it, and immediately bringing to mind the sacred teachings given to us by our honored ancestors in the Odu, in Fada, I hope I pronounced that correctly, which tells and teaches us we are to constantly strive and struggle to bring good into the world and share it and not let any good be lost. So that is Kwanzaa. We'll move on to the L.A. Times and General Kelly here, John F. Kelly, said his tenure as the Trump's chief of staff is best measured by what the president did not do. Interesting here. This is in the Los Angeles Times on the 30th of December. By Molly O'Toole, an Irish name there, and Kelly. Anyway, top officials from the Pentagon, CIA, and Director of National Intelligence, diplomats, and lawmakers huddled with Trump as Kelly and others urged him not to give up in Afghanistan. When I first took over, he was inclined he wanted to withdraw from Afghanistan, which would have been the correct position. Kelly recounted during an extensive 2-hour interview with the Los Angeles Times. He was frustrated. It was a huge decision to make, and frankly, there was no system at all for a lot of the reasons. Palace intrigue and the rest of it when I got there. Retired 4-star Marine General will lead administration on Wednesday. First as Homeland Security Chief and then 18 months in the White House. He presided over some of the Trump's administration's most controversial immigration and security policies. In the phone interview Friday, he defended his rocky tenure and argued that it is the best measure by what the president did not do when Kelly was at his side. And we'll see what DJ Trump says about that once he gets out the door. It's only after Kelly's departure was confirmed, that was on the 8th of December, for example, that Trump abruptly announced the pullout of all troops from Syria, and half of the 14,000 from Afghanistan, two moves that Kelly had opposed. Kelly's supporters say he stepped into the block to block or deviate the president on dozens of matters, large and small. They credit him in part for persuading Trump not to pull U.S. forces out of South Korea or withdraw from NATO, as he had threatened to do. Well, the problem here, again, this is based upon the racist Wilsonian foreign policy, which still lingers here. You can update that to neocons. But that policy is finished. Why are the troops in South Korea? Well, one thing, DJ Trump has moved along with the North under Chairman the Democratic Republic of Korea, to try to settle those differences on the Korean Peninsula, and the Koreans themselves are trying to settle that. Even if the president says he often relies on his gut rather than U.S. intelligence. It's never been. The president just wants to make a decision based on no knowledge and ignorance. Kelly said, you may not like his decisions, but at least he was fully informed on the impact. It's not that DJ Trump does not know the impact. I would say that DJ Trump, on many of these situations, such as Afghanistan, he had decided a long time ago that that was a dry hole of throwing money in and they're going nowhere. Kelly allowed that spending nearly every waking minute, 15 hours a day, with a president seemingly inundated with one crisis after another, has been a bone-crushing, hard job, but you did it. On most days, he said he woke up at 4 a.m. and typically came home at 9. Then he often went straight into a secure area for classified reports and communications so he could keep working. I am guarded by the Secret Service. I can't even go to get a beer. He could. He'd take the Secret Service with him. Trump sometime pressed his advisors on the limits of his authority under the law, often asking Kelly, why can't we do it this way? But Trump never ordered him to do something illegal, because we wouldn't have it. Anyway, if he had said to me, do it or you are fired, Kelly said he would have resigned. Interesting. Kelly enlisted him to bring order to the White House. Racketed by interagency rivalries. Well, that happens at every White House. High staff turnover and constant controversies. Well, you have controversies when your plan is not settled. Although he sometimes clashed with other aides, he said he tried to leave the policy out of it. I told the president, the last thing in my view you need in a chief of staff is someone that looks at every issue through a political lens. But in reality, there is that political lens, and when you have a very unconventional president who does not have a political background, you have all kinds of problems. And also the political sands have been shifting the last 30 years since Wild Bill Clinton. They've shifted even more. He served in the Marines for 46 years, from Vietnam to the rise of the Islamic State, making him the military's longest-serving general when he retired in January of 2016. When Trump picked him to head Homeland Security, then served as White House Chief of Staff, officials from the Pentagon to Capitol Hill expressed hope he would be able to, as they say, calm things down. Not so. First of all, Trump had never been in the military. Having a Marine there didn't mean anything to Trump. Worse, they agree he aggressively advocated and implemented harsh immigration measures, including separation of immigrant children from their parents on the border last summer, that quickly ran aground and were reversed in court. Kelly rejected the reports that Trump bristled at the endless briefings, no doubt about that. Kelly's tight-fisted control of access to the Oval Office, but his anticlimactic exit reflects a tenure dogged from the outset by indignities of constant speculation fueled by the president's own public remarks that he would be fired. Kelly said he decided it was time to leave after the November midterm elections. They all say that. John Kelly will be leaving. I don't know if I can say retire from the South Lawn, as he left for his annual Army Navy game. He's a great guy. That's DJ Trump talking there. Unlike Kelly's friend, General Mattis, Mad Dog Mattis, a retired Marine general who resigned as Secretary of State with a public statement on his way out the door. Kelly leaves as Trump has been cocooned in the White House as a partial government shutdown moves into his second week. His demand for the $5 billion doesn't work out that way. He won't get the $5 billion. He can forget that one. Kelly led Homeland Security in early 2017. One of the first steps was to seek advice from those who actually secured the border, what he called Joe Six-Pack there. Well, the problem with people that actually secure the border, they're in a law enforcement position, and the actual immigration policy is a political decision. And that's where you mess up. He added, if there's security crises at the southern border, however, Trump had drummed up fears of a migrants' invasion for political reasons. Kelly did not answer it directly, but he said, we do have an immigration problem. Well, they've had an immigration problem for a long time, lesser one than what they had before. But he saw the corruption and violence that has spurred immigration from El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala. First, as head of the Pentagon's Southern Command, which stretches from the south of the Americas to Mexico's southern border, then at Homeland Security, which they have created these problems themselves. Illegal immigration overwhelmingly are not illegal immigrants, were not bad people, he said, describing many of the migrants as victims misled by traffickers. I have nothing but compassion for them, the young kids, the young kids, future workers of America. He blames the immigrants and lawmakers, not the White House, for the tense situation at the border, where thousands of Central Americans are stranded in Mexico. 2 Guatemalan children, of course, have died there in custody in Texas and New Mexico because they don't have adequate. Again, this is a law enforcement situation for a administrative problem. In other words, you just can't jail people and don't have the facilities in place to take care of them, especially children. You have to have medical facilities there, whether you have an adequate medical facility in your country or not. They do in Mexico. Kelly faults administration for failing to follow procedures and failing to anticipate the political outrage for the 2 most controversial initiatives of his tenure: Trump's travel ban and the zero tolerance. Well, anytime you get the zero tolerance, that's farcical. Immigration policy and family separation. Shortly after taking office, Trump issued an executive order which immediately suspended the entire U.S. refugee program for 120 days. And that was for political purposes. Refugees already approved for resettlement, green card holders, and others were turned away from flights, detained, and in some cases deported. Federal judges issued emergency stays, and the court has been brought into this time and time again, which happens many times when you have political stalemates and politicians that obviously do not want to do anything. There's only so many things the chief of staff can do, practically with a personality like DJ Trump. That's David Lampan of the Bipartisan Policy Center, who worked with Kelly at the Homeland Defense. Now to Beauregard Sessions announced his zero tolerance program. That's something somebody named Beauregard Sessions would announce. U.S. officials had already begun to put the policy into practice, resulting in hundreds of migrant children being separated from their parents. Kelly said Sessions' announcement caught the White House by surprise. What happened was Jeff Sessions. He was the one that installed the zero tolerance program on the border that resulted in both people being detained and families separated. He surprised us. The chaotic implementation then fell primarily on the Department of Health Human Services and Nielsen, who came under fire for standing on the White House podium and saying that there was no policy of separating families. Kelly surprised some of his friends when he backed Trump after a deadly crash again between Nazis and counter-demonstrators in Charlottesville, Virginia, home of the Crystal Ball in 2017. When Trump blamed both sides for the violence, Kelly seemed to hang his head in disappointment. But he later defended the Confederate memorials and suggested that the Civil War was not caused by slavery, but the inability to compromise. He's crazy. After deadly ambush of troops that was in Niger, Kelly gave a rare White House news briefing to defend the president. He attacked Florida Congressman, I remember that, Dr. Jackson, who was friends with the family of one of the soldiers that was killed there. Remember that one also? Kelly's eldest son, Robert, also a Marine, was killed in Afghanistan in 2010. Asked why he stayed 18 months in the White House despite policy difference, personality clashes, and the punishing schedule and a likely lasting association with some of Trump's controversies, he said, simple duty. Well, he didn't have any duty. He'd already retired in the military. Military people, he said, don't walk away. Well, he's walking away now. So, in other words, how do you assess something of that nature? That in itself, let's see if I can get the front page of the L.A. Times up there. The delivery operations at the L.A. Times, San Diego Tribune, and other papers back on track after malware attacked them. We didn't report this. We went up there. Visitors stream into which national park is this? Never heard of it before. Joshua Tree. I don't know. I guess that's somewhere by San Diego. That's what we assume has happened. And some other little things that will move along from it as we. It took a little time to get everything where it should have been. The government shutdown, well, we talked about the stay, so that's probably as far as we go. Government shutdown in the second week with no resolution in sight. It's from the Washington Post. And we talked about what Kelly said. Senator Graham of South Carolina, who spoke to reporters after a lunch with Trump, said, suggesting that the president might win over Democrats by trading wall funds for extended legal status for the Dreamers. Trump's counselor, Kellyanne Conway, who's an idiot, said of the Sunday morning that it was a silly, semantic argument to debate what the border wall would be made of, or sought to blame the Democrats for refusing to compromise on the president's demand for billions of taxpayer dollars for a wall. During the campaign, Trump repeatedly said Mexico would pay for the wall. Not going to happen. Trump backers backed the spending bills passed by the House Republicans. That was on the 21st, including a more than $5 million for the border wall, which is crazy. John Tester, you'll hear from him in a minute, said the Trump administration spent very little of the $1.3 billion that Congress allocated for the fiscal security improvements earlier this year. No doubt about it. This is really not there. Their big thing. Hakeem Jeffers, he's from New York, chair of the House Democratic Caucus. I didn't know that he was that. Said congressional Democrats are certainly prepared to provide additional funds for enhanced fencing, technology, drones, satellites, all of it there at once. Lightning sensors, cell phone towers, and anything that the experts have clearly indicated would improve the border security, but held firm against a physical wall. When Trump and the Republicans want to do is waste $5 billion of taxpayer money on the ineffective medieval wall that is a 5th century solution to a 20th century problem. No doubt about that. I guess they'll build a Great Wall of China before it's over. Our negotiations, the impasse, that is from Richard Selby. He's been around a long time. He's from Alabama. He's chair of the Senate Appropriation Committee. I wish it were not so, but we've got to move away from the blame game. If we blame each other, this could last a long time. Well, it will last a long time. Not unusual there. DJ Trump refers to it as the Schumer shutdown. The other people call it the Trump shutdown, so they can literally, as they say, debate that one. Conway, speaking on Fox, said the onus is on the Democrats to reopen negotiations. She's crazy. So, no negotiations? Well, they just sat there and see what happens. It is a question when we get off the blame game and we get to the serious game. That was Shelby's. Well, it's not going to happen because there are just so many problems out there. There's so much to fear about nationalism, but liberals need to address it in the right way. That's from E.J. Dionne, one of our favorite liberals. In affluent neighborhoods around Washington, New York, Los Angeles, and for that matter, Paris, London, and Berlin, it's common to denounce nationalism. Well, it doesn't have to be in affluent neighborhoods. It could be in the ghetto. To disdain supposedly mindless, angry populists, and to praise those with an open mind, cosmopolitan view, and note those that are praising themselves. Lord knows there is much to fear about nationalism. Extreme nationalism can lead to fascism, and it has done that before, and it's led to it now. That's one of the biggest problems the Russian Federation has, is their nationalism has moved to racism, and the problem there is in a world, even a globalized world, and we'll separate that out in a minute here, you have problems on the international scene, and that is how the quote-unquote market economies are now set up. Nationalists can open paths to rules by the ruthless and cynical autocrats. But those who would save a democratic democracy, along with anyone who has advanced a broad progressive political agenda, needs to be honest with themselves and less arrogant towards those who currently find nationalism attractive. Well, that's a double-edged sword there. We'll get to it in a minute here. Across the democratic world, well, that's not necessarily a democratic world. You wouldn't define a government that doesn't have national health care as democratic. Enormous divides have opened between affluent metro areas and the small cities, towns, and rural areas far removed from the tech boom and knowledge industry. Globalization marred to a rapid technological change have been very good to the well-educated folks in metro areas, and a disaster for citizens outside of them. This is now a truism. You have to watch out when the word truism is being used, but it took far too long for economic and policy elites to recognize what happened. It should have not taken the Brexit referendum victory, the election of DJ Trump, the nationalist surge in Hungary, Poland, France, Germany, and Scandinavia to bring home the cost of these regional inequities. The problem is, however, that these various populist, nationalist governments really don't have a fix. They did not have a fix in France there, or in Poland on the right wing of there, or in Germany under these neo-fascists, or on the Scandinavian fascists, period. The central theme of political writer John Judas is an excellent and compact book, The Nationalist Revival, published this fall. A person of the left, well, that is specialized in speaking truth to liberals, and sometimes he did it in his early populism explosion. He thinks it's impossible for progressives to understand why for so many are driven to Trump and far rights in Europe. Well, they've been going in that direction for a long time. Some of them never left. From the days of Schicklgruber, Hitler, Judas sees the rise of nationalism as a reaction to illusions and excessive globalism by unleashing footloose capital and undercutting national, even international efforts to regulate the economy in the public interest. Globalization is incompatible with social democracies in Europe and the New Deal liberalism in the U.S. Well, the problem there is these neoliberals that want to follow Salazar's model, which he did in Portugal there, state capitalism. The purpose, he purposes a useful distinction between globalism and internationalism. Now, internationalism, a Marxist concept, been around a very long time. He's against the first one, but for the second one, globalism, he argues, this is Jewish, subordinates nations and national governments to market forces, and that is what is called nihilism. Neoliberalism are to the priorities of multinational corporations. That is Mr. Salazar's model. Internationalism, on the other hand, accepts the nations may sometime have to cede a part of their sovereignty to the international or regional bodies to address problems they could not adequately address on their own. Well, that has been out there, but what the multinationals have been able to do in country after country is basically buy off these operators, as they did in the U.S. with the Tea Party, Express, and various things like this. Republicans dreamed that up, using so-called moral issues such as abortion, etc., to, as they say, get the natives restless. And this border thing where people actually think that thousands of people are going to come across the border. They are not thousands, they are hundreds. And even less than that, looking for work for the most part. Now, obviously, anytime you have any flow, you're going to have opportunist criminals coming across the border. But law enforcement is more sophisticated by the day, there's no doubt about that. And since they have surveillance over the air, the water, the sea, and anything else that's worth anything, who knows? But the critics of Trumpism need to recognize the ways in which globalism undercuts the rights and the fortunes of large numbers of democratic citizens. The dispossessed often turn to nationalism. They did that. They turned to Schicklgruber or the Hitler for relief against their own sense of powerlessness. In other words, the idea of the very strong leader that is going to lead us somewhere. And these people will admit freely that they voted for DJ Trump and it doesn't work out. They will not take any responsibility. Trump will not take any responsibility, so you'll just have wasted times. Trump brought these obligations home on the weekend with his horrendous, heartless, and deceitful tweet seeking partisan advantage from the deaths of two migrant Guatemalan children after their apprehension by the federal authorities. But this is nothing new or necessarily indecent about citizens saying that the nation has a right to control its borders. Yeah, well, nations do have a right to control its borders, and they always have been. But there's the challenge for the left and for those advocating humane immigration policies is to move the debate from an angry extractions about open borders and towards a practical engagement with basic questions. What level of immigration is optimal at this moment for the nation as a whole? What will it take to reach a consensus for creating paths towards citizenship for immigrants who are here illegally? And how do we build a stronger civil culture that allows the rights but also the duties of the native-born and immigrants alike? For various reasons, I prefer to defend patriotism rather than nationalism. This is E.J. Dionne speaking here. The word aside, friends of liberal democracy need to keep the two ideas in mind at the same time. On one side, they should not automatically cast those who worry about the decay of national sovereignty as reactionaries. Well, but they are reactionaries. That's part of the problem right there. And for a majority of these people, they were reactionaries before DJ Trump came along, and they will be reactionaries after DJ Trump departs the White House, either in 2021 or 4 years later, 5 years later. On the other hand, they must continue to insist, and urgently so in 2019, that American patriotism and the defense of constitutional democracy are one and the same. Well, part of this problem here, you've had opportunism for so long, and this is what has really caused problems. Let's get to the NBA now. Let me get my pointer straight here. The Kings were at the Lakers in Los Angeles. The Lakers pulled it out 121-114. The Pistons were at the Magic 104-107 for the Pistons. The Timberwolves were at the Heat, and they actually beat the Heat 113-104. The Bulls were at the Raptors in Toronto, 95-89. And the Thunder were at the Mavericks in Dallas, 105-103. Mavericks. And the 76ers were out in Portland, a long ways from home, 129-95 for the 76ers. On to college basketball. Let's see, we have the big game. That will be between Clemson and Alabama. Alabama beat Oklahoma 45-34. Notre Dame fell to Clemson 30-3. I didn't do very much at all. Florida and Michigan, where are they? It was Florida 41-15 for Michigan. South Carolina and Virginia shut out South Carolina. And finally in overtime, Arkansas State and Nevada. A low-scoring game there, 16-13 was the score. So we have some games later today. Cincinnati and Virginia Tech, and Stanford at 2 p.m. and Pittsburgh, Michigan State and the Oregon Ducks at 3 o'clock. These are all Eastern times. Missouri and Oklahoma State at 3:45. Northwestern and Utah at 7. North Carolina State and Texas A&M. And tomorrow on the 1st, Mississippi State and Iowa, LSU and UCF. And at 1 p.m., Kentucky and Penn State, Washington and that'll be around 6 o'clock, and Ohio State. And finally, Texas and, not exactly finally, Texas and Georgia and Clemson, Clemson, Alabama. They'll be on the 7th of January. Let's see what the 7th, I have to get my calendar. Be on a Monday night. All right, so we got that out of the way. To the NHL, not a lot of action going on in the NHL. We have the Golden Knights and the Coyotes. The Golden Knights 6-1 there. So this will do it for us, the Monday Morning Quarterback, the last Monday Morning Quarterback of 2018. Looking here, this would be a number of broadcasts for us, almost 4,000. 2 million people have visited us, and the various networks we're on, iHeart, Srika, Stitcher, the YouTube operation there, Twitter, Facebook. Incidentally, in 2019, we'll have some more live broadcasts. We used to do live broadcasts as video, and we do in audio also on almost forgot. Well, yeah, we did actually on 2 different live stream live stream, of course, is bought out, and we did a live stream, and there was one other one. I guess I hadn't heard much of them lately. But Livestream decided they would charge $100 per month, so that was that. But YouTube, you can also go live. We'll be recorded on YouTube. Getting ready for that. We'll try some of that. We'll also be doing in 219 some call-in programs. We attempted, I believe, one this year and didn't get the callers in there. That was over at the Blog Talk franchise. Very tenuous in that. The Blog Talk is merging their people over to Spreaker. And at the same time, they are trying to get people on Blog Talk. So we're not really sure about the Ask H about that. Hell, he knows. But there's a whole lot of things going on in the podcasting world in terms of these various networks that are out here. The aggregators that are around, the Lipsons of the world, the Blueberries of the world, etc. They're just aggregators. And the destination points there. Then you have some of the larger operations, such as NPR, and various others coming in there. One of the big problems here, however, is if you have, say, one that has millions of listeners, viewers, etc. Well, they already had that. NPR has millions of listeners on their radio situation. Now they're taking it to the old radio, taking it to internet radio, so-called podcasting. Well, podcasting warped back to internet radio, but Jerry Pippin was one of the founders of. We see it going in that direction. And at the same time, you have the YouTubers, but YouTube has been fractionized somewhat by increased commercialization. That people subscribe to YouTube TV, they can see this without the commercials. Anyway, those are some of the things that are happening there. It's a bit in the air. More and more of the internet radio people are going to their own network, but also hosting their own network. So, where will the aggregators be in this situation? Very, very interesting to find out how people will be getting the people over. There was a big debate on the podcasting group on Facebook about people spotlighting their shows. If they say have 50,000 a month, that's roughly over 1,000. If they depends on how they're doing it. But anyway, and some that have less than that, monetization involves basically people that have at least 5,000 per cast. And so if you have that, you'd have over 50,000. But with some of these smaller, what they call niche markets, you wouldn't need that. You could have as little as 100 people. It would depend on the value of your audience. And we'll have a special program on the state of podcasting, or internet, we call it internet radio, hopefully this week. Anyway, nonetheless, good day. Happy New Year. Happy Kwanzaa. And if we forgot anybody, Happy New Year, and well, Happy Christmas if we left you out. On to the Face the Nation, a little bit of it. Michael Moore, this will be Mr. Besheloff, and Joyce Kern Goodman, historian, presidential historians there. And two others, they'll be talking about books they have out, and back to the what we call the old standbys, Abraham Lincoln, Roosevelt, and at least Joyce Kearns Goodman got in. I wish Mr. Dalek were there, but anyway, she got in LBJ. LBJ has become increasingly more important because of his war on poverty. So we're back with LBJ and that, and the war. Good day.
Writers whose recent works give insight into how we came into these unpredictable times and where we might be headed next. Historian Michael Beschloss is the author of Presidents of War. Pulitzer Prize winner Doris Kearns Goodwin's latest book is Leadership in Turbulent Times. Peter Baker is a chief White House correspondent for the New York Times. He covers the current president as well as the three previous. He's a contributor to Impeachment and American History. And Jill Lepore writes for The New Yorker and is the author of These Truths, A History of the United States. Well, there are a lot of lessons to be learned from history, but Michael, one of the things you constantly hear about where we are right now is we're looking at a president who believes history begins with him.
Well, the founders of this country, they really had the idea that what would distinguish us from England and the monarchies of Europe would be we would all know history. We would learn really quickly where generations of Americans earlier had gone wrong and where they had done well. And presidents, maybe above all. Harry Truman said he couldn't understand how anyone could be president of the United States who did not know history. Truman always said, not every reader will be a leader, but every leader has to be a reader.
But you write as well, though, that in some ways the Founding Fathers probably put a bit too much power in the presidency.
They expected that the first president would be George Washington and every later president would be like him. As we've seen, not everyone turned out to be that way. But the thing the founders worried about most of all was that presidents would try to grab too much power. And through history, that has sure turned out to be the case. One of the ways they've done that, which I've written about, is in wartime, because war, if you're looking for a president who gets more power and in some cases abuses power, war is the quickest way to do it. I think the founders would have been very worried about the fact that a president nowadays can get America involved in war almost single-handedly, almost overnight.
And single-handedly get us out.
And get us out, absolutely. I think if they came back today, they would feel that presidents nowadays have much too much power, and they would feel that it's the job of every citizen to try to resist that.
Doris, because we're in such turbulent times, the idea of leadership qualities, and sort of the tone and tenor of what's communicated to the American public is something you've been looking at. How did you decide on the 4 presidents that you focused in on?
Well, they were the ones I knew the best. I'd lived with them for a long period of time. So I figured if I was going to look at them in a different way through leadership, that I wanted to know them already. But once I did it, it was a much greater adventure. It took me much longer. I thought, oh, this will be easy. I know these guys, the 2 Roosevelts, Abraham Lincoln and LBJ. But I felt each time I finished a book that I was turning my old boyfriend away when I had to move to the new guy. So I figured I'll get them together and I can spend time with them. And what really became important was to see is there a family resemblance of leadership strengths that they exhibited. They were all the right person for the time. That's the interesting thing about what you're saying. Maybe the founders would feel the presidency was too powerful in wartime, but if we hadn't had a powerful president like Abraham Lincoln to issue the Emancipation Proclamation, if we hadn't had Teddy Roosevelt as a steward of the American people at the time of big companies swallowing up small companies, if we hadn't had FDR there at the time of the New Deal and the Great Depression, they all took power. Lyndon Johnson took power to get the civil rights.
It's an issue of values for him when it comes to serving in the current administration. Fundamentally, he believes that we are breaking away from our alliances, and that is painful to us, damaging to us as a nation.
Yes, that was something we have never seen before in American history, which is a Secretary of Defense resigning in protest and anger with basically a bill of indictment against a president saying, you do not believe President Trump in the things that you should, such as alliances, and we are dealing with Russia and China. You're not regarding them, with sufficient degree of vigor as competitors with us, and essentially saying, you and I do not believe in the same political ideals. That is something that you very rarely see. And I think the result is that members of Congress are now going to have to make a decision, which is if President Trump, let's say, decides to appoint a new Secretary of Defense who is more compliant, sort of in the way that he appointed Matt Whitaker to the Justice Department as an acting Attorney General, will you see people like Mitch McConnell stand up and say, I've been with you on an awful lot of other things, Mr. President, but this is too important. We will not confirm someone like that.
We're going to take a quick break and come back. We'll be back in a moment with more from our historians panel. With our panel of historians, Doris, how do we understand right now this idea of what it means to be an American? It seems like we're sort of arguing about it amongst ourselves these days.
I think we have to remember that this country was founded on a set of ideals, and it's not just a place. And that's what's so special about that. When you think about the Declaration of Independence, you think about the idea that all men were created equal, and the founding fathers who wanted us to be something different, a beacon of hope to other nations at large. I think we just have to instill that. I know it sounds so simple sometimes to say civic education needs to be restored, but when we were young, we used to sing these songs. We used to read about the government, and we used to think about what the ideals were. And I think as a nation right now, That's what's going to bind us together still, however different we are.
What has disrupted that? What has changed that?
Well, I don't fully understand the partisanship, to be honest. I mean, it's been going on for a period of time, and it's people from one part of the country not feeling good about the people in the rural area, feeling bad about the cities. It's what happened at the turn of the 20th century when it was a disruptive economy. You had the Industrial Revolution, you had a gap between the rich and the poor, you had immigrants coming in, you were blaming them for the workers not feeling that they were enjoying the prosperity of the nation, which they weren't. But I think to some extent, what's disrupted is I don't understand. When I read the other day an article that more people now would be worried about their kid marrying outside their party than they would about religion or race. I mean, how can that be?
Life has changed.
I know. I mean, something's happened where the identity with your own group, and it has to do with the way the political system is structured. It has to do with the money in politics. It has to do with the congressional boundaries. It's people living and only talking to people that they're used to. Mm-hmm. They've now segregated themselves in cities or rural areas, and that the television is cableized, and the social media is fragmented, and the things that used to draw us together. I mean, when FDR gave one of his fireside chats, everybody in the country, 8 out of 10, are listening on their radios. It's a collective experience. Saul Bellow said you could walk down the street on a hot Chicago night and you could look in the window and see everybody looking at their radio. And you could hear his voice coming out on the street, and you could keep walking and not miss a word of what he was saying. So President Trump has tweets which can reach that many people, but it's an individual experience to read his tweet. It's not collective the way it used to be. And that's what we're missing, I think.
And often presidents, the time they would speak and explain a complicated policy would often be around when we're facing conflict or a major national security crisis. We learned about withdrawal from Syria and possibly Afghanistan through Twitter.
That's right. And that's a problem because, Americans, for instance, when they're trying to think about the world or about an unpopular decision a president makes, a president really should spend some time explaining it. I think of Lincoln, for instance, when he was running for re-election in 1864. And his advisors said, I think Doris will concur on this one,
who are asked to believe in fundamentally different values and not asked to think about what one another's values are and what the shared values are, was built by some very cynical political consultants in the 1970s and 1980s who wanted to get voters to the polls using emotionally charged life or death issues that were constitutionally weak. So the sort of abortion guns schism of the 70s and 80s. Mm-hmm. Either if you're a conservative, abortion is murder and guns are freedom. If you're a liberal, abortion is freedom and guns are murder. And this, it's all life, it's all the death or freedom. And sorted people out very calculatedly for decades. And just when they were done with their work, social media more or less emerged. And now all that is done by automation. Really, we're in a political machine of a new generation of machines where we are sorted. Polarization is done automatically, and it's very difficult to get out of that machine.
So connect that idea to impeachment, as Jill was referencing there. I mean, you're talking about the strategy of how this might play out in a future Congress. What did we see happen with Clinton there? Because it's often referenced that the Trump camp is modeling the Clinton strategy on how to handle this.
In some ways they are, right? What Trump is going after the investigator in order to discredit anybody who comes after him, right? That Mueller is and his angry Democrats are all in a witch hunt against me. Well, the word witch hunt were used in 1998, usually not by Clinton. He usually left it to others to do that. He was a little more subtle about it. But the effort was the same, to discredit the accusers and to make sure that anything that came of it was partisan. The Democrats wanted to make this partisan just as much as the Republicans were willing to make it partisan in 1998, because the Democrats knew that as long as it was partisan, it wouldn't succeed. Mm-hmm. And because you couldn't get two-thirds vote in the Senate. They were willing to take the vote in the House, which is essentially the indictment, as long as they could win the trial in the Senate. And so this is, if you're going to head down the same road, now you can make the argument that the crimes here alleged are much different, of a different category, that the volume of them may be different. But the issue of division, the issue of how we interpret those crimes is still pretty much the same.
Well, we're going to have to leave it there. It was a good conversation with all of you. We covered a lot of territory. Sure.
Facebook what? Facebook Watch, a new place for videos.
At least with Donald J. Trump.
Yes.
And what inspired you to do this? Because a year ago, I saw you on Broadway in The Terms of My Surrender, which this movie shows you didn't surrender.
I have not surrendered.
No.
No, I have no intention of surrendering.
That's correct.
So what made you say this? I've got to do this.
I honestly believe I am very sincerely worried that what we call our democracy will not be in the same shape or form by 2020 if he continues. And if he gets a second term, if he goes to 2024, I show in the movie reasons why, regardless whether you're a Republican or a Democrat or a non-voter or whatever, you should be deeply concerned as an American what is taking place here in terms of the lack of respect for the rule of law, the lack of respect for the Constitution, and the fact that Trump really just doesn't believe in democracy. Now, to his credit, if I can say that.
Wow, do we all get that?
Yes.
To his credit.
And look,
here it is.
I didn't self-combust. I'm still sitting here.
To his credit.
To his credit, he was a CEO and a billionaire. How many CEOs of corporations that you know that believe in democracy? They don't run their corporations like a democracy. They run it as a dictatorship. I'm in charge. Do what I say or leave. And also they end up making the most money. So he likes that idea of the few making the most money while everybody else works their butts off, working longer hours than people ever had before. Many people working 2 jobs. And he wants the say. He wants to be able to say, this is the way it's going to be. I mean, we've seen him just recently call for an investigation as to whether or not the license of NBC should be taken away because they did something he didn't like. Taking away the license of a television network. He does not believe or like the idea of a free press. In fact, he calls it a fake press. He doesn't believe that he doesn't believe in obviously unions. He doesn't believe that people should have collective bargaining rights. All these things that we believed in for a long time, he doesn't believe in. He hates obviously all welfare. If he could, I'm sure he would reduce Social Security.
These pesky entitlements.
Pesky entitlements.
Yeah.
And you think of your 80-year-old mother, your 90-year-old grandmother. Not the only reason that they've been able to have some kind of sustenance and live quasi-decently is because we've had this for so many years. That's the danger here, that his lack of respect for the things that we all believe in is very, very dangerous. And this movie asks the audience, take him seriously. Stop calling him an idiot. Stop saying that he's crazy. He's crazy like a fox. He outsmarted us all. I mean, seriously, Peter, do you know how to win the White House by losing the election? I mean, the man got 3 million less votes than Hillary, and he's sitting in the Oval Office. That, you have to admit, is like some kind of pure or at least evil genius.
But he had which is in your movie, the reaction of him winning.
Yes.
On 11/9.
Yes. See, a lot of people didn't see it because it was 2:30 in the morning.
Right. But, I mean, and you say it on your voiceover. It's like nobody looked more miserable.
They all walked out. His family, his staff, they're all got these glum faces. I say in the movie, it looked like a perp walk. I mean, Trump did everything but, put the coat over his head. Look, he didn't expect to win. I mean, it's just been revealed by his wife that he had no victory speech prepared or written for him. And frankly, I'm not so sure he would have been that unhappy with the fact that he had lost, because somebody along the way must have told him, look, if you win this election, you've got to live in the White House. And the penthouse there is called the second floor. There's no penthouse. There's no gold-plated toilets. There's you've got to live in Washington, D.C. This is a 300-year-old house that's got no air conditioning. I mean, this is not going to be a pleasant experience for you.
It's
so
no
I'm sure he was thinking, it's no
Mar-a-Lago.
Mar-a-Lago.
No, it isn't.
No. There's not even a putting green at the White House.
There are many things that you show in the movie that we have seen before, and yet it's there for a reason. Because why does Donald Trump do this as opposed to what we see with the sexual predators and harassers who've been sneaking around? It's all very furtive. He does all this right in front of us.
Right.
And people say, isn't he great?
It's part of his genius of knowing that if you do it out in the open, people will either accept it, love it, or at least say that you were transparent.
There's just so many things that happen every day that when I saw your movie for the first time when it opened the Toronto Film Festival, all I could think was, it's not finished.
Right.
You could keep going on.
Yes.
And adding more into this.
That's why we decided on the first day of production for this film that we not chase the news. If we chase the news cycle every day, we will never finish this film. Because you could keep making a new film every day practically. So we decided not to do that. And that's why when you said at the beginning, this isn't just a film about Trump. I'm not going to make people sit in the theater for 2 hours.
2018 may very well have been the craziest year in recent political history, but there's every reason to expect 2019 will be even more nuts. As we await the conclusion of the Mueller investigation, Democrats with subpoena power are poised to bring investigation to nearly every aspect of the president's political and business life, and we can predict how he will react to that new reality.
You're saying that if they start investigating you, that you can play that game and investigate them.
Better than them.
Can you compartmentalize that?
And I think I know more than they know.
Can you compartmentalize that and still continue to work with them for the benefit of the rest of the country,
No.
or are all bets off?
No. If they do that, then it's just all it is a warlike posture.
Joined here on our final show of 2018 by Academy Award-winning filmmaker Michael Moore, whose latest documentary, Fahrenheit 11/9.
Yes, that is definitely... How does this affect me? Could this hurt me? Will I lose money? Can I make money? Everything is processed through that filter. So if something's going to happen in a room with Russians or others that could find him indicted, I think more than likely, because remember, he doesn't drink, he doesn't do drugs, he is of his own faculties.
Yeah.
He made sure that he wasn't in the room.
You know, one of the things that I look forward to most, which relates to this more than maybe seeing people indicted or orange jumpsuits, is just finding things out. Like there are still a bunch of facts that we don't know. There are indications of what happened. But I have a personal thirst to know, like, exactly what went down in 2016. Yeah. I guess I don't. Really? I know. I really don't. Because I already know. I already knew. I thought what was going to happen was going to happen. So it wasn't a surprise. Right. And then I haven't been surprised by anything I've seen. I think that more important is what's going to happen next year. So what I would like to see happen is the number of women who ran for office in November, that we double or triple that for 2020. That people who are watching this at home right now, who are with family during the holidays, and maybe are thinking of running, whether it's for Congress, whether it's for state Senate, whether it's for city council. There are off-year elections in 2019? Off-year elections next year. Run. Make that your New Year's resolution. Why not you? Why not you? Right. Chris. No, you have a job. Yeah. No, but it's a citizen's responsibility to participate. It's if you're called to serve, and this is your moment, all of us as Americans, to serve, to save this country, to move it forward, and to do the things that we want to do. How about this? How about a resolution by the media and myself and everyone else that we not let Trump control the conversation every single day? I think that's a good resolution. It's something that we've been talking about how to deal with that, although... Show what he's doing. Right. Again, report what he says. Right. And then that's it. Although, again, let's talk about what we want to talk about. I get that. We set the conversation. Right. I get that. At the same time, it's like in the midst of the Saturday Night Massacre, in the midst of the Watergate hearings, like that's the biggest story in the country, no matter what. You're not like letting Nixon set the tone for the coverage, right? Like on the weekend of the Saturday Night Massacre, that's the thing you cover, right? Yes, but you're talking. You see the dilemma, right? Well, you're talking about 40 years ago. But I think there's very good reason to anticipate events of that magnitude and impact happening in 2019. You had to cover it that way back then because there were 3 networks. Right. Now there's 3,000 networks. Yeah. On social media, terrestrial, cable, whatever. The aliens, they have their own. Right. The Astoria apparently was beaming something last night. I'm just saying that we should not allow him to set the agenda and the conversation. Let's go into 2019 talking about what we want, like Medicare for all. Let's just start talking about that. 70% of the American public wants Medicare for all. 52% of the Republicans want it, and 70% of the American people want it. That's the statistic. In polling. I'm not saying that the idea does not sound good.
Don't
to a lot
go
of
all anti-Kornacki on me here with the polling. No. The polling, you do have to pay some attention
it's a very popular idea. All I'm saying about it is that things in the abstract sometimes are different than they are in the political reality of something that's
so abstract. I don't even know what that means. But seriously, I really think that if we control the conversation, we're in charge. We have the power.
Yes.
We won the 2016 election. We have the most votes. We have more people now than ever thinking of running and should run in 2020. And this new freshman class in Congress has got to come in and really set the agenda and fight. Or otherwise, those people that came out in the midterms are not going to come back out.
I think the point about agenda setting, I think, is an important one because one of the problems with unified governance when there's no Democrats is that the agenda is naturally set sort of unilaterally, right? I mean, the Democrats don't control either the House or the White House. It's hard, they can't really set an agenda. With the House, you have things like the select committee that's been on the climate crisis, the talk of a Green New Deal, voting rights, the Voting Rights Act, for instance, which the House can now pass, restore the part of the Voting Rights Act that the Supreme Court gutted. All of those things are now within the power of the Democratic Party to actually just put things on the table, which they couldn't do before.
Yes, and that is what the people are expecting the Democrats to do. Not to compromise, not to find the middle of the road, not to be moderate, but to fight for the people, fight for the things they want. Tonight, people are watching this right now. They're really quite scared about what's going to happen with the economy.
I don't disagree.
Civilians don't understand, and we're not those who aren't. We are. Right. I don't own a share of stock, so I don't pay any attention to this. But I know when I see a roller coaster, and when it shoots up and then shoots way back down and shoots way back up. You've got an economy with an opioid crisis, its own opioid crisis, where there is a crash that's about to occur, and people feel it. They feel it. They've been told that we have trillions of dollars of credit card debt, student loan debt, all these things where what's the shoe that's going to drop here if it's not the housing thing that was in 08.
Corporate debt.
And this is starting to feel like 07 right now. Right. And it really so
let me put on my macroeconomic head for a second and just say I think there's reasons to think we're now on the precipice of something similar to 2007, although there's lots of worrying things happening, particularly with corporate debt and the end of.
Well, one way it's not the same is that if you're booted out of your house, that's a serious issue. Yeah. They can't take back your college education.
Right.
That you're not paying them back for.
Yeah.
So that's
you can't clear it in bankruptcy either. What are the things that you're if the idea is that you want to see Democrats sort of put things on the agenda, you want to see people, I think a hard thing to do and an important thing to do is for people's civic activism to remain high, right?
It's great to be here, Margaret. Thank you.
Your colleague, Senator Shelby, said negotiations are at an impasse and they need to find out what Democrats want and when. As the Democrat here, what can you explain?
Well, first of all, Margaret, I would just say that, we passed a bill a couple weeks ago to keep the government open, and the House refused to take it up. I think that the fact word of government shutdown is nothing short of ridiculous. I think that Senator Shelby and others are spot on. We need to sit down and pound out a deal. I think that agreement that the Senate passed in a bipartisan way a couple weeks ago would have given us the opportunity to come to an agreement. The problem is that the president has $1.3 billion from last year for border security, actually $21 billion for border security, $1.3 for the wall that he has spent very, very little of. And
he says he needs more.
Yeah, and he says yet he needs more. Yet there's no plan to go how the money is going to be spent, or any analysis on what's most effective to secure the border. Bottom line is, Margaret, is that I don't talk to anybody in the Senate that doesn't want secure borders. It's just how the money is going to be spent. And if the president wants to continue to take a campaign promise that he made, which was to have Mexico pay for a wall, and say, no, the rules have changed. Now we're still going to build a wall, but we're going to have the American taxpayer pay for it. We're going to use the American taxpayer like an ATM machine. That's not the right direction to go.
The White House says it's Democrats who walked away from the table. You heard Senator Shelby say there was an offer that he put forward of $2.5 billion this year, $2.5 billion next year. What happened to that?
Well, I think that that deal never got past leadership. But what did happen this last year is the president asked for $1.6 billion in his budget proposal for this next year. The Appropriations Committee, which Senator Shelby chairs and Senator Leahy's a ranking member of, agreed to that. in a bipartisan way. Senator Shelby voted for it. Senator McConnell voted for it. The president moved the goalposts and said, no, now I want $5 billion.
Well, and they've come down to around 2. Why can't Democrats come up from 1.3?
Well, I think that's negotiations that need to be done between leadership, between Senator Shelby, Senator Leahy, and others, and move forth. But the big thing is that how's the money going to be spent? What's the most effective way to secure that southern border? And that's really what's important here. I think we can do it with technology and manpower and much more effectively than with a wall.
You heard Senator Shelby say there that he thinks probably you're going to have to talk about things that Democrats have said they've wanted, including protections for Dreamers. Is that the kind of sweetener that would get Democrats to reconsider?
Oh, I think we've been here before. I was in the room when the president said, if Congress passes something, I'm going to sign it. And then he moved back away from that. And so I think ultimately in the end, we do need comprehensive immigration reform. There's no doubt about that, Margaret. But in the end, we need to know what the president wants, and hopefully he'll stick to it. When we passed the bipartisan funding to go to the 1st of February a couple weeks ago, the president said he was going to sign it. And then after we passed it, he said he wasn't going to sign it. We need some predictability.
The president said of those 2 migrant children who've died in U.S. custody that it's Democrats' fault. Essentially, he's arguing that there's incentives that are in U.S. law that encourage people to cross and take this really dangerous migration route. How do you respond to that?
Well, I respond to the fact that we need comprehensive immigration reform that needs to be there for a while. I think it's everybody's fault. This is unacceptable. And the bottom line is that if we're able to get comprehensive immigration reform done, which is going to require some leadership from the White House, too, then I think that we will see things settle down on the southern border in a big, big way.
Is there a cost for Democrats to appear to work with the president?
No, I think what Democrats need to do is they need to work for the country and make sure that not only the southern border but the northern border is secure, make sure that we have the ability on the ports to be able to screen every vehicle coming across to make sure that drugs don't come into this country. And I think that if we're able to get a plan to be able to do that, which I don't think is that hard to do, I think Democrats and Republicans can work together to make sure that we have a secure border and keep this country safe.
When we introduced you, I pointed out that you were one of only 2 Democratic senators to get reelected in a state that the president took by double digits back in 2016. And the president came to Montana and personally campaigned against you.
Yeah.
How do you take your win and advise other Democrats on how to win states in the West and Midwest?
I don't look like your basic Democrat, Margaret, and we still farm. My wife and I still farm. We still believe in the citizen legislature model. We go everywhere in the state. I go everywhere in the state, and I listen to Montanans, whether it's in conservative areas or liberal areas, and take those ideas back to Washington, D.C. and put them into action. I think it's more of a function of listening and going everywhere. I don't believe in models that say you just knock on this door, you just go to this community, and you'll get elected. I think you go everywhere and you listen to everybody. Everybody's got ideas. Some of them are great, and take those great ideas back to Washington, D.C., and that's how we won.
In saying that, though, are you implying that Democrats have gotten out of touch with the part of the country you're from?
I think all politicians have gotten out of touch. In fact, that they just go to certain places where they think they can get enough votes to win. I think that what makes this country great is a Washington, D.C. that works for everybody and works for this country. And in order to do that, you've got to go everywhere and listen to everybody's concerns and needs and go back and try to find solutions.
As you said, you're one of the few working farmers still in the Senate. So I want to ask you about the impact of the trade war. The White House put together the second bailout package for American farmers because of some of the impact of the trade war. What has been the impact you've seen in your state, and are people questioning their support for the president because of it?
Well, margins in production agriculture are always really narrow. And so when you get a situation where you start to lose export markets, which is what has happened with this trade war, you end up lowering prices at the farm gate. You have more farms that potentially go into a situation where they're not solvent anymore and bankruptcy. The trade war has to end. We need those foreign markets. I personally have about 40% of my crop still on the farm from 2017 because of the trade war. Most folks can't stand that. In fact, after about 18 months, they'll start going broke. We need those markets. We need to hold China accountable, but we need the markets, and we need to move forward. There are other ways to put pressure on China other than using the family farmer, the American farmer, as a tool. For instance, use the financial system. It'll bring them to the table much more quickly, I believe, and it won't put folks in rural America out of business. And I think that if this continues, we'll see more farms go broke, and we'll see rural America further be further diminished.
Senator Tester, thank you for coming.